Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Remember, if you love film, gaming, or television content, please consider clicking that subscribe button because today we're finally going to be talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So, let's get into it.
I've been looking for this all my life.
As you may already know, I have covered all of the previous Indy films, and I have to say, watching them for the first time, the mainline trilogy, I really enjoyed. And it made me excited for this movie, which wasn't one I really cared to see, apart from the fact that I wanted to see a new James Mangold movie. I really love his work. Ford v Ferrari and Logan are both excellent movies. And it seemed like a good kind of partnership with him and this franchise. If I had to pick another director to direct an Indiana Jones movie, not named Steven Spielberg, I think James Mangold would probably be really high on that list. Then we start seeing some very mixed reaction out of the Cannes Film Festival, where this really got a real lukewarm reception. There was a standing ovation for Harrison Ford, but it felt more like a tribute to him rather than the quality of this movie. I kind of disregarded it just because a lot of more prestige films play at the Cannes Film Festival, so a big blockbuster like Indiana Jones probably wouldn't get the best reception there. It always depends on the audience that you're playing it to, and that's probably the worst possible audience to play an Indiana Jones movie to. So I watched this film, and what do I think? Well, it's a pretty mixed bag. I don't really like a lot of it, but there are some redeeming qualities to it. It's definitely not the Flash level bad in my eyes. I'm not going to go on a rant about it, but there are some real critical elements that knock this down a lot in my eyes and make this one of the weaker films in the whole franchise. And that pretty much starts from the opening scene. You get introduced to this really spotty visual effects straight away with this de-aging of Harrison Ford. While I don't really mind the concept of it, it needs to be executed really well for it to work. Otherwise it looks super janky, and it looks super janky here. It just looks like something that an AI made. When you see those on your phone or something, it just kind of has that similar feeling to it. His face doesn't quite move right, and it just looks real out of place. Indiana Jones movies are famous for having some spectacular opening sequences. Even Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I really don't like that movie, and while that opening sequence is just ridiculous in a Fast and Furious type of sense, it is at least memorable. This one feels really safe, really generic, and didn't set a very good impression on me at all. It almost took me out of the film completely for a good chunk of it before I started enjoying some moments in it. And I think that's because it just feels so artificial. I understand that Harrison Ford is in his 80s and cannot perform a lot of the stunts he committed to in the previous Indiana Jones films. But that makes me question, why are we making this movie in the first place if we cannot do the similar kind of stunts and incredible action sequences that Spielberg just masterfully created with Harrison Ford as a collaborator? If we don't have that, we're losing quite a lot out of Indiana Jones. And when you don't have that, as we do here, it really makes me question why this is being made in the first place. Also, in regard to the overuse of digital effects and basically no practicality in a lot of the stunt work here, I understand that a lot of the sequences here you just couldn't do practically. They're too crazy. People would die doing it. It's just nuts. There's no way that Harrison Ford, even back then, could do some of the stuff that happens in this movie. But let's be creative here. Let's come up with stunts that these people can actually do. Steven Spielberg did stuff in his movies that someone could actually do. They were still dangerous, but they could pull them off effectively. Here, it just doesn't happen. And once again, makes me question, if you cannot do this stuff, why are we doing it? But in terms of some positive elements, I do like the performances. Harrison Ford just kills it as this character. He knows it inside and out, and once again delivers a great performance. Phoebe Waller is also in this, and I've heard mixed things about her performance in this, but I think she was fairly solid. She was a good sidekick to Indy. Definitely not my favorite one by any means, but I didn't mind her in the movie at all. Then you have Mads Mikkelsen and Boyd Holbrook as villains in this, and I really like their inclusion. Boyd Holbrook especially felt really dangerous and just a nice addition to this movie. Mads Mikkelsen never gives a bad performance and once again delivers here on a really, really compelling villain performance. But I think really the biggest thing holding this whole thing back is that the story is just kind of boring. Sure, there are some compelling moments, especially when characters are just talking to each other. I actually found that side of this movie a lot more compelling than even some of Spielberg's ones. But the action sequences are just lacking in a lot of ways. It's not just that they feel very artificial and there's no real authenticity here. It just doesn't feel very interesting. It's just dull. It's just a lot of noise and carnage that just doesn't work for me. And it left me very disinterested in a lot of those scenes and almost checked out completely. Another thing I want to mention is that this has some of the worst sound mixing that I have heard in a while. Some of the sounds of, a horse going along or some carnage going on, that's all really great. But some of the dialogue you cannot hear over the sound. It's kind of a similar issue that we saw with Tenet. It's not as frequent, but it is there. And I found it kind of annoying at times because I completely missed what a lot of the characters had to say at some points. I actually think that this movie takes a very long time for it to get going. There wasn't too much I was actually compelled by until we started getting around the middle of the movie. And this is a 2-hour and 22-minute film, so that's a long time where I'm just not really interested in what's going on here. And it's such a shame because I really wanted to love this movie a lot. Even The Treasure, while it has some interesting moments, I do like the whole concept behind the Dial of Destiny. It just doesn't do a whole lot with it. It feels like one of the more least interesting treasures that Indy is trying to find, alongside the crystal skull and everything that goes on with that. There's just not enough real history behind it in my eyes that made it something that I wanted to learn more about. In the first 3 Indiana Jones movies, they all tied back to some kind of really interesting history that I wanted to learn more about. And while this does have ties to real history, it just didn't work for me. Then we have the third act. I'm not going to spoil this movie at all. I'm going to dodge a lot of stuff here, but I am very mixed on it. Some of it are some of the best parts of the movie in my eyes, and some of it are some of the stupidest part of this movie. It's not as crazy as Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in my eyes, but it is way more far-fetched than the original trilogy, and I really wanted it to go back to that more grounded, well, kind of playing with cursed treasure and a more realistic sense of what an ancient cursed treasure can do, rather than having these big world-changing sequences. Honestly, some of it I was rolling my eyes at. I was like, this is just dumb. I cannot believe we're kind of going in the same direction that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did, which was an absolute deal breaker for me for that movie. But as I said, some of it is executed better. James Mangold knows how to end a movie, and it felt like it was leading to a conclusion that was satisfying for Indy, but then at the same time, it felt really dumb as well. It sounded like a better idea on paper than in its execution. And by the time that we hit the final scene of this movie, it just makes me question why this was needed in the first place. There are 2 other films that want to wrap up Indiana Jones as a character and put a nice little bow on this whole series. And I think The Last Crusade did it pretty much perfectly with them riding off into the sunset. And when we have these 2 other movies that are also trying to give a definitive ending to Indiana Jones, it doesn't feel well executed. It doesn't feel like it was necessarily needed. And that was the main problem here. It just doesn't feel important. I cannot really understand why it was made in the first place, other than we want to dig up some nostalgia and make some money. Honestly, I'm not mad at this movie at all. I'm just a little bit disappointed. I do wish it was a lot better, and I'm kind of craving a real movie with a real director's vision behind it, rather than what feels like a studio made movie to just sell merchandise and make money. Because sure, this digs up the nostalgia. You get John Williams' score, you get callbacks to the other movies and things like that, which made some people very happy in my screening. There was a lady, when the credits rolled, who was conducting the score and clapped at the end of the movie. I was like, okay, I think there's much better Indiana Jones movies than this. Maybe I'm just too cynical, but I just don't really understand why anyone would want to rewatch this or even stack it up to the original trilogy, which to me is what this should have been in the first place. We shouldn't have 5 Indiana Jones films. We shouldn't even have 4. 3 was perfect, I think, and there's just no real need to keep digging up this franchise. It's done. Just leave it alone. In terms of a score, I think the Dial of Destiny is around a 2.5 out of 5. Not offensively bad, but just painfully mediocre and average, and I don't think I'm going to remember too much about this movie when it's all said and done. It's not going to be on any of my lists at the end of the year. It's just going to be one where I'll see a poster in the future and be like, oh yeah, that movie exists. That's all it is for me, really. Anyway, let me know what you think about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny in the comments below. I don't know how people are going to react to this one because Rotten Tomatoes, it feels pretty mixed. You know, it started off kind of negative, but the score's kind of growing. But I really just don't see how this can be enjoyed by a mass audience. I think we're going to get a very mixed reception. So yeah, I really want to know what you think. And that concludes my full series of Indiana Jones reviews. It has been a blast seeing this series. I have really enjoyed the experiences I had with Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, which I love that dark side of Indiana Jones. I know that's not the most popular opinion with this, but I just love that angle that it took. And I'm kind of sad to see it go back to a more PG or G-rated, family-friendly kind of version of Indiana Jones. I totally get why they did that, but for me, I just love that dark angle. And The Last Crusade, while it wasn't my favorite film out of the trilogy, I absolutely love the place where they left the character. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was a terrible movie, and this was just plain average. So all in all, the trilogy is where it's at. These 2 extra ones, I think if you're a diehard indie fan, maybe you can stomach the rewatch, but other than that, why bother? So with that said, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.